Today's lecture is on sociobiology. Sociobiology is all about looking at animals' behavior and then trying to see patterns in their behavior that kind of mimic the patterns that we see in humans' behavior. I'll get into it in more detail over the next few slides. But one of the examples I give sometimes is of grackles. Now, this is a lady grackle, and what she'll do is watch the male grackles. And the male grackles will sit around in the springtime and puff way up and dance and try to outdance each other, and then she will make her determination of which one she would like to be with. Does that sound like humans? It might. And so that's what sociobiology is all about, is noticing these patterns like courting dances, etc., and seeing how we act in a similar fashion. So I have this definition, I think, right here. It says, how is our social behavior? Here, the social behavior is attraction. How has that resulted from evolution? These evolutionary forces. Now, sometimes people hear that word evolution and they say, oh my God, you're going to tell me I'm a monkey. I do believe you're a fancy monkey that takes themselves way too seriously and wears clothes. But I don't care if you believe in all that. But Charles Darwin didn't even coin the term evolution. That was Herbert Spencer. And so he talked more about individual fitness. But I was going to go on a little tangent for a minute to talk about evolution. Now, if you notice these two moths right here, one has an advantage. It blends in. It's called camouflage. Okay, and the other one, what will happen is the birds will just eat these right up because they stick out real easy. So over time, there was a lot of more white moths in England, they noticed, than dark moths. But then came a change in the climate. Due to man-made circumstances, the Industrial Revolution blackened all the trees, and now, if I can get here, the advantage changes, camouflage. So really the trait can be arbitrary, that's why I'm showing this example, but the changing times favor different traits. That's evolution. Okay, so in this book on the origin of species, Darwin in 1859 talked about two things. He talked about the thing I just mentioned, which is what people, I can't talk good right there, call evolution, traits that favor our survival. Like if you have a woolly coat or long teeth or claws or stuff like this. But that's not what this lecture is about. I want to talk about traits that favor your mating success. Like if you're born looking like Ariana Grande or Brad Pitt or somebody else, we consider that attractive. Why? What does that predict? And that's what this lecture is truly about. Now, when Charles Darwin talked about these two things, natural and sexual selection, this is survival, this is mating. When he talked about these two different processes, he had four basic tenets. You can try to write all these down, but I'm going to try to sum it up all in a nutshell and make it easy. Number one, not all of us are alike. Big whoop is like, yeah, some people are black, some people are white, some people are short, some people are tall, some people have blonde hair, some people have no hair, right? So we're not all alike. And number two, guess what? Some of this is due to DNA. A lot of it is. We just studied that genotype is responsible for the majority of your phenotype. And so 1 and 2 aren't something that I'm teaching you that you haven't already known. Number 3 is a basic fact of life. Not everybody is going to live for a long time, and not everybody is going to reproduce, have children. Okay, that's the biggie. And number 4 is, well, based on number 1 and 2, those two things predict number 3. What does all that bullshit mean? Genetic variation, let me erase this. Genetic variation is 1 and 2. Predicts survival and mating success. That's it. Okay, so if you're born looking like Heidi Klum, you're probably not going to have a hard time getting a date or having kids. You know what I mean? It's like, or if you're born looking like Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, you're going to have both easy time getting girls, and also people aren't going to fuck with you because you're big as a motherfucker. You know what I mean? So those two things promote both traits. Okay, so I hope I made sense right there. Now, one of the last things that Charles Darwin talked about that kind of confused him is that sometimes natural selection was at odds with sexual selection. What does that mean? Your survival was at odds with your mating success. For instance, look at this little house finch. I'll talk about him a little bit later. House finches attract females based on how brightly colored they are. So if they're really, really bright, they get a lot of lady action. That's great. But guess what? Predator action too. Because predators go, what's that big bright thing? I'll go eat it. Okay, so if you're duller, if I can erase this, that's better because no predator is going to eat you because you blend in, yeah, but you don't get no lady action, so you don't have any babies. So there's this optimal point right here in the middle where you have this risk-reward trade-off where if I'm real flamboyant, yeah, I got a lot of mating success, but I might get killed. But if I'm not flamboyant at all, I get almost no mating success, but maybe I survive for a long time, but the species is not propagated. So I'm going to show some examples of wild plumage. Plumage means feathers, and so I have a little movie. I have a bunch of movies today, but this next little movie is all about these cases where the feathers get really, really wild and almost interfere with survival.
The male monal pheasant impresses his female with a greater expanse of unbroken iridescence than is possessed by any other species. The Argus pheasant has the largest of all tail feathers, and wing feathers that are certainly as spectacular. And what can rival the train of a peacock? The costume put on specially for courtship dances by the African widow bird may not be quite as extravagant and unwieldy as those of the pheasants. But the widow bird displays by flying with his. It's a hazardous business, exposing yourself like this, even if you can fly. You're making yourself an easy target for a hawk, and there are many around on these grasslands in Kenya. Evidently, the additional matings a male gets from displaying in this dangerous fashion make the risk worthwhile.
Okay, I hope you could hear that video. Sometimes the volume is a little bit low on that particular one. But anyway, the last bird was the African widow bird. And so they are picked based on their tail length. The longer the tail, the better they are. The ladies like a long tail. And so anyway, if you have a short stubby tail, you're not going to get any attraction because that's not what the ladies are looking for. If you have this great big long tail like this guy has, it's great, except that you can't get away from predators so easily. So there's that risk-reward trade-off. Now, what does runaway selection mean? Well, over time, ladies weren't mating with these guys down in here, if I can get my pen erased. And what happens, it pushes the distribution to where those guys kind of die off because that DNA is not represented in the gene pool because the ladies aren't mating with the guys that have the shorter tails. And so, yeah, there's still some variation, but most of the African widow birds have longer tails now because that trait was selected for. Oh, we like that. And then we just got out of control with it. And like a runaway train, the tails got just absurdly long. Now, that happens with all kinds of animals, and I think that's what I have on here is I'm fixing to go off on runaway selection. I could apply it to people, too. We like a trait like big boobs or something, and then it just gets ridiculous where it runs away like a train. It's like, come on now, that's not even normal. Okay, so here's some of the traits that I'm talking about. I mean, look at this runaway selection. That's crazy, that bird. Why would you need, I understand you want to be a little coloredy, but just some the crazy birds of paradise I have on here. I really love this one up here. He's so pretty. It's one of my favorites. But all these different, like, how does this help out with your survival, having that big ass thing on your head? It doesn't. It interferes with your survival, but it helps you a lot with the attraction of mates. Now, I think, yes, I have my lyrebird on here. He's one of my favorite ones to show. I'm fixing to show a movie. One of the things he attracts the ladies with is his big tail, but the tail also, he flags it kind of, and you'll see this on the movie. But that also attracts predators, so risk reward. The other thing he does is he sings, and the lyrebirds are mimics, and they can mimic all different kinds of things. And the more kinds of things it can mimic, the more likely it's going to attract a lady. So I don't know if you're going to believe this next video, but it's one of my all-time favorites, and here it goes.
What bird has the most elaborate, the most complex, and the most beautiful song in the world? Well, I guess there are lots of contenders, but this bird must be one of them. The superb lyrebird of southern Australia. He clears a space in the forest to serve as his concert platform. To persuade females to come close and admire his plumes, he sings the most complex song he can manage, and he does that by copying the songs of all the other birds he hears around him, such as the kookaburra. It's a very convincing impersonation. Even the original is fooled. He can imitate the calls of at least 20 different species. He also, in his attempt to outsing his rivals, incorporates other sounds that he hears in the forest. That was a camera shutter. And again. And now a camera with a motor drive. And that's a car alarm. And now the sounds of foresters and their chainsaws working nearby.
I know you probably don't believe that last video, but he was really making those chainsaw noises with his mouth. Now, this next video I'm fixing to show you has to do with birds of paradise. And birds of paradise, of course, have some crazy plumage. This is the 6th plumed bird of paradise. That's hard to say 6 times in a row. But anyway, not only do they have really wild plumage, runaway selection, but they have really wild dances. So I'll let the video speak for itself.
Less than 2% of the sunlight reaches the floor, but even here there is extraordinary variety. In the great island of New Guinea, there are 42 different species of birds of paradise, each more bizarre than the last. This forest is so rich that nourishing food can be gathered very quickly. That leaves the male six-plumed bird of paradise with time to concentrate on other matters, like tidying up his display area. Everything must be spick and span. All is ready. Very impressive, but no one is watching. The superb bird of paradise calls to attract a female. And he has more luck. But what does he have to do to really impress her? She retires to consider her verdict. It's hard not to feel deflated when even your best isn't good enough.
Okay, I kind of went off on a tangent there. I could talk about runaway selection all day long, but let's come back to this idea from Charles Darwin of sexual selection. When he talked about sexual selection, the traits that favor mating success, he talked about two interrelated processes. And so the first one is called inter. Intersexual selection is how do men pick women or women pick men. So that's across sexes is how I remember it. Like an interstate goes across states, like from here to California, Interstate 10. Intrasexual selection is more like competition between the sexes. How do males compete with other males? Or how do females compete with other females? So how females choose males, that's like female choice. Our male choice would be how males choose females. That would be intersexual selection. I'll come back to this several times, but I'm going to use bullfrogs as an example. I wish we were in class. One of the things that lady frogs like in a male bullfrog is his ability to croak and blow this big throat pouch up real big and croak real deep. So that's inter, how ladies pick men across the sexes. So what does that do? Well, the men start to know this and they start to get in competition with one another. And so late night down at the pond, they're all trying to out-ribbit each other. And so that's an example of intra, because that has nothing to do with the female, but they're competing with one another within the same sex, intra. And so if you look at it this way, the intersexual selection, what she likes is what really drives the competition. If she didn't like that, they wouldn't compete based on that. It can go the other way too. If men didn't like big boobs, women wouldn't get boob jobs. They compete based on that trait because that's what men, male choice, has driven. And so a lot of times, if you want to think about it this way, choice is inter, male or female choice, and that choice drives the competition, which is the intra part down here. So intra and inter. Okay, so why female choice? Why not talk about male choice all the time? Well, Robert Trivers and Simons and other people talked a lot about this, but it has to do with the fact that we're a mammal. And the fact that in mammals that women lactate and nurse and carry the pregnancy and do a lot of the work. And plus women have a limited number of eggs from their first period to their last period, menopause, to where men don't have these time constraints on that either. And so if you look at this within mammals, that sets up a kind of different goals. Women, when it comes to a sexual encounter, should be a little bit cautious because they have a lot to lose. They could get pregnant. They're going to have to take care of the baby. They might have to nurse the baby. They got an 18-year commitment, right? Men might not have as much to lose. It's kind of mean, but they're not going to get pregnant. If they wanted to, they could just take off the very next day. And so that men and women go into a sexual encounter with different goals, or at least different, whatever concerns is probably a better way to put it. Women might have to do a lot of the child care, and men might not help out with that. And then the other thing is, like, men have kind of unlimited number of sperm, whereas women have that time constraint on their, ova. Now, if I get off of this and start talking about it in real people terms, what they say this sets up is this dilemma between men and women, where women are really choosy about who they have sex with. That's why we call it female choice. And men, it's like not so choosy about who they have sex with or how many partners and all this other kind of stuff. And so from an evolutionary perspective, it kind of makes men and women a little bit incompatible when it comes to sexuality. And so I have some silly graphs right here that I was going to show, and we'll get off of this. How smart does somebody have to be to date, have casual sex, steadily date, or be married to? See, this is women. They're pretty consistent. Something happens right here for men. It's so silly. Because if you accidentally get pregnant right here as a woman, you're going to have dum-dums, baby. You see what I mean? Men don't have to worry about that because they might be dum-dum. So I know I'm being silly right here, but in a way it's not silly. Okay, besides that graph, I have this one. How long do you have to know somebody before you have sex with them? 1 hour? 1 day? 5 years? See, women, it's like they take a while to warm up. Men are going, 1 hour is perfectly okay with me. It's so silly. But what the idea is, it's kind of driven by different evolutionary needs, where men are out there to propagate and spread the seed and have a lot of babies, and women are going, wait, that's going to be my baby. I want to make sure that I get good DNA. Okay, so to sum it up, as I go through the whole lecture, the rest of the lecture today, choice drives the competition. Okay, this next section is on the 2 goals of intersexual selection. So I'm going to expand on just intersexual selection for a minute, and that's all about choice. Female choice. I could talk about male choice, but it's all about how females choose males or vice versa. Now, the first goal is this: good DNA. If you're going to choose someone to be your mate and you might have kids with them, that's the whole, end game here, because it's sociobiology. That's why it's heterosexist, males hooking up with females to have kids, but good DNA. Okay, so you don't want to have someone with bad DNA because your kids are going to have bad DNA. Now, when you think about humans, you don't run around showing each other your DNA, but I think we will do that in the future, like Gattaca, that movie. Y'all probably don't know it, but whatever. But we can see someone's phenotype and use something like, let's say, symmetry to say, oh, they must have good DNA. Okay, the second goal: protection and provision. If you're going to pick a dude, it's like, can he provide for you? Does he have a good career? Does he make money? This, that, and the other. Is he big? I mean, is he little? What all these different, issues might come into play. So I kind of look at it like shopping. And on your shopping list, I've simplified it: good DNA, protection, provision. This could work the other way too. Men pick women based on, okay, what do you look like, physically? That's good DNA. Second thing is, are you going to be a good mom? Are you nurturing, etc.? Now, one of the things that men do to show that they can protect and provide for women, I don't know if it works or not, but provision, I should say, is they ingratiate women with gifts. If you roll out with one of these gifts from Tiffany's, you might do pretty well, you know what I mean? Because girls like that kind of stuff. Not all girls, but a lot of do. And what it's saying is, here's a gift, it's very expensive, that means I have the means to attain this gift, right? And so I'm going to show some examples of this, but not with people, with animals. So here's the video.
Having
Okay, I have three different animal examples that I'm going to use to illustrate this whole process, or the two goals. I hope you can see my fingers there, of intersexual selection. Remember, good DNA and also protection and provision. So look at this first guy, house finch. What is the first thing you notice about him? Probably that he's really red. That's why I picked this example. It's very noticeable, what they call overt, and it varies within the population. For instance, some house finches are really, really vivid and some are really, really drab. If you're really vivid, that's great because you attract a lot of ladies, but you also attract a lot of predators. If you're drab, that's not so great because you don't attract a lot of ladies, but it's great that you don't attract a lot of predators, and we talked about this before. But over time, we mentioned runaway selection. The females aren't mating with these guys, and so the population gets shifted this way, right? But there's still some variation there. So she's using this trait to pick her mate based on. And so when she picks her trait based on brightness, they have found this within populations of house finches, that the brighter males are better at feeding the babies. Within house finches, males do a lot of the feeding versus females. And so when they're picking based on this trait, it's really neat to me. They're actually, checking off one of the things on their shopping list, and probably this one too. Why? Because their sons are going to have that kind of DNA. So they can get both things from this one trait. I hope that makes sense. Now, the next guy that I want to talk about is called the pied flycatcher, this sweet little bird right here. And the pied flycatcher sings all kinds of songs. And with a lot of birds, it's about their repertoire, how many songs, how versatile, all these different things. And so when they look at versatility and song repertoire with this guy, It's really neat because that's a trait that varies within the population, and it's a trait that they compete based on. Unlike the redness, you can't really change your redness. Here you can compete based on this thing, and it just so happens that the best singers have the most food in their territory. So when the females pick the best singers, it's not like, oh, he sings real pretty. It's like, A, your son might be a good singer, right? The good DNA. And B, you're going to get some food to eat. So it meets both goals. Now the third guy is my favorite because he's the artist bird. The artist bird, the bowerbird, they live in New Zealand. At least some of them do. And this is the satin bowerbird. And so here's a real picture of them. And so they're collectors, and they build these bowers on the ground, these nests. They're kind of like horseshoes or field goals. And then what they do is they go and pick up a bunch of stuff and they start weaving it into the nest. And so they can pick up tinsel and like this guy has a blue fetish. You can see he's picking up all this blue stuff, but now you can really see the horseshoe nature of the nest. And so the females like this. They choose based on this, so that female choice drives this competition amongst the males. And so you can see here, this guy's weaving thread into his, and he has a green kind of fetish. And this guy even has money, and I love this guy's putting flowers in there. And so the competition can get kind of fierce, and they try to out-trick each other, their nest. And speaking of trick, one time I was watching a video, I wish we were in class, I'd go off on this, but I saw this one where the guy would just hang out and wait for the other guys to leave their nest, and he would go and steal all their shit and put it on his nest. Tell me that's not like a dude. But anyway, I'm going to show you one more movie, and then we'll move on.
But some birds construct even bigger buildings to impress females. And to see the most spectacular of all, you have to come to the dense forests of the islands north of Australia. Some females can be persuaded to mate for rewards that are more abstract than mere food and lodging. There's a kind of bird here in New Guinea whose females select a male not because he's a better meal ticket, but because he's a better artist. How else would you describe this wonderful construction except as a work of art? This is its creator, the Vogelkop bowerbird. He has a passion for interior decoration. His hut, almost big enough for me to crawl into, is neither a home nor a nursery. It's a gallery in which he can display his artistic creations to visiting females. These flowers come from a creeper that has only just started to bloom. Great new material for anyone who likes colour, and he loves it. The iridescent wing cases of beetles also appeal to him, and he's amassed an impressive collection. But they're always in need of a little rearrangement to show them off to their very best advantage. He calls to invite female visitors. There are several such bowers in this part of the forest. 100 yards away, there's another one, built by another male of the same species who has a slightly different artistic sense. If a female decides that this is the best selection of jewels, then she'll mate with the owner. So here, where living is easy, a female is not bowled over by practical things such as food or accommodation. It's beauty that wins her heart.
Okay, I just wanted to wrap up this section and remind you of what we're talking about. The whole lecture, if you really focus in on it, is all about how choice drives competition. Her choice that she likes fancy nests drives the males to try to outdo one another. And this whole choice is based on two goals, because really his outdoing has a lot to do with his ability to out-procure other males, right? He can gather more stuff. And it also says something about his DNA, because if she has a baby by him, maybe her son would be a good nest builder. Okay, so I do have another animal example, and then I'm going to move on to the last two things. This red-winged blackbird. I love this example. Okay, so females pick this male based on this little patch right here on his shoulder. I wish we were at school because they're right on campus. So it just so happens when she picks the redder ones, you know, they do have the best DNA, but they happen to be the worst fathers. They're really crappy fathers. They don't take care of the babies. And so she meets this one goal, and this is what they call the sexy son hypothesis. She gets the good DNA, but she doesn't get the protection and provision because he's going to take off on her ass. That sounds a lot like human beings. I don't know. I'm going to pick the really hot guy, but he might not be the best person that's going to nurture and take care of my kids. Okay, so next section. Polygyny. Polygyny are these systems where one male mates with many females. Sometimes it's called harem polygyny because the males duke it out. This is an elephant seal on the beach. It gets real bloody and violent. And then the winner is like, I kicked everybody's ass. I get all the females. Nobody else lays a hand on the females except for me. This is kind of like the king. Kings used to be like this. So this is usually based on aggression, this competition in these systems. Other systems is like we just showed, the bowerbirds. They're not out there kicking each other's ass. They're out building each other on nests, right? So here in these systems, it is a lot of physical aggression. Well, think about our society. There's a lot of male-male competition that ends up in physical aggression. And so even if we're not polygynous society, we do get these alpha males, the guys that rise to the top, just like in these societies, and they establish these dominance hierarchies where it's like, dude, I'm on the top, and here's like, you know, how the pecking order goes. I know all about this. You know what I mean? I've been dealing with it my whole life. Think about prison. There's Big Daddy, and nobody fucks with Big Daddy because he runs the fucking yard, and everybody else is up underneath him. It's a system of domination. And so even though we might not have this system of domination, we do celebrate alphaness, right? And people have these pecking orders based on aggression. Okay, so the last example is polyandry, poly, many men. Polygyny, many women. Polygyny, G-Y-N, like gynecology. Okay, so one female mates with many males. So in this system, there's a queen. And there's all these other females that could mate with the males that come around, because in a lot of, I guess, with monkeys, there's like troops and they're held together by the females, but sometimes the males aren't a part of it. They just rove around. And so when they come around, only she gets the opportunities. So she is queen, whatever, B. I don't want to go and say a bad word right now, you know what I mean? So anyway, but she doesn't establish it through fighting. She established her, royalty in another way. So these two females right here are capable of coming into their menstrual cycle. It's really estrus, but they're capable of being sexually mature. But for some reason, her pheromones stunt all the cycles, the periods, for lack of a better term, of all these females below her. They can't come into their period. How do they know this? Because if they take her out of this cage, one of these will just come up here and immediately go into their period and be able to mate. But if they bring her back into the cage, their period will go away and they can't mate. It's so weird, but it's this pecking order that's established by pheromones, and it's not established by let's get out in the yard and like fight it out. Is that not like men and women? It's like guys are real direct, girls are kind of indirect, and that's why I have this silly little thing on here. I don't know if you like Mean Girls, but there is a queen bee, and she establishes her royalty, and everybody else is up underneath her, and so you do have these similar systems of domination. Okay, so that's everything for today. Next time, we're going to go into sociobiology and how all this stuff directly relates to people.